Welcome to the next session. In this session, we will be looking at ocean acidification. So what is ocean acidification? The IPCC 2011 definition talks about ocean acidification refers to a reduction in the pH of the ocean over an extended period, typically decades or longer, which is caused primarily by uptake of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, but can also be caused by other chemical conditions or subtractions from the ocean. Anthropogenic ocean acidification refers to the component of pH reduction that is caused by human activity. So this is what is the main definition from the IPCC about ocean acidification. Now, how the ocean acidification actually happens? The CO2 is considered as one of the important component which plays a pivotal role in ocean acidification, which is also called as the other CO2 problem, because we already know CO2 is one of the important greenhouse gas, so that is responsible for the climate change. That is in the atmospheric carbon dioxide. Now we are talking about the carbon dioxide that is getting into water. So basically CO2 is a multi-edged sword, not a double-edged sword. It is actually a multi-edged sword. So the reason is, in the lithosphere it is used for the photosynthesis. That is a good aspect. But in the atmosphere it leads to greenhouse gas, which is a bad one. In the hydrosphere it leads to ocean acidification. This again is a bad one. And in the cryosphere, it acts like a climate-sensitive carbon reservoir. It may be a good one. So, it can be used as either a positive one or a negative one. That's the reason the ocean acidification studies involves multidisciplinary research areas, mainly chemistry, paleontology, biology, ecology, biochemistry, modeling, social sciences, and economics. Let us look at what is the seawater pH. So this is the main crux about the ocean acidification. So if you know the seawater pH, then we can understand what is ocean acidification. The ocean acidification is the ongoing reduction in the seawater pH, predominantly due to the uptake of CO2 from the atmosphere. So this is what is the basic definition. So as the CO2 increases, the acidity increases, that is the carbonic acid amount increases. In other words, the pH decreases. A change of pH in 0.1 results in increase of hydrogen ion concentration. So this is what is the actual thing happening. So what causes this change? There is a atmosphere C exchange of CO2 is one of the important process. Now let us look at what is this change of pH. So here is the pH scale that is given from the acidic to the basic one, and neutral is the region which is given in green color, which is actually expanded here. And if you look at the pH from 7.2 to 8.2 is the scale we had given here, and each one refers to how much hydrogen ion concentration, that is the moles per liter of hydrogen plus ions present at a particular pH is given, because pH is nothing but a negative logarithmic scale, hydrogen ions concentration. So if you look at 8.2, the concentration of H plus ions, that is the number of moles per liter, is actually 6.3 into 10 to the power minus 9. At 7.2 it is 6.3 into 10 to the power minus 8. So this is the hydrogen ion concentration only. But when we move from a pH 8.2 to 8.1, the hydrogen ion concentration actually changes. So from 6.3 it goes to 7.9. So there is an increase in the amount of H plus ions. That is what is happening. So what is the difference if we look at the percentage wise? So that is actually 26% of hydrogen ion concentration is actually changing. So similarly, if you go from 8.2 to 8.0, the difference is something around 58%. And if you go from 8.2 to 7.9, which is not a very high, the difference if you look at just a 0.3 scale, but pH is basically a logarithmic scale. So that's the reason the percentage of hydrogen ion concentration change is drastically changing. So how do we know addition of CO2 leads to water acidification? So this is another question we are going to answer. So this scaling curve is a very famous curve which talks about the change of CO2 concentration in the atmosphere. It was measured from 1960s onwards till 2010. The values are given here. So it keeps on, it is like a seesaw type pattern or a breathing pattern. That's what people call that. So this clearly tells there is an increase in the amount of CO2. So from around 300 ppm to currently we are reaching close to 380 or 390 according to this graph, which is still 2010. But currently in 2024, if you look at it, it crossed close to 400 ppm. So in this one, if you look from 1990 onwards, so there is a amount of CO2 dissolved in water increases. So this is the amount of CO2 which is increasing, which is going in a random fashion. But when the amount of CO2 in the aqueous condition increases, what happens is the seawater pH actually decreases. So this is what is the way by which we can actually understand if the CO2 is entering the seawater, then the pH of the seawater decreases. And again, there was another question which we have not answered earlier, which is what is the effect of this change, the seawater change, and what causes this change? So these are all the two questions we have to answer. The first one may be, the cause may be atmosphere-sea exchange of CO2. That is one of the reasons. But is there any other reason? When we look at that, introduction of CO2 into the ocean, what happens actually? There is a oxidation, that is either photolytic or microbial oxidation of terrestrial organic carbon may happen. So this is happening from the reverse. The CO2 is coming from either rivers or coastal erosion entering the ocean. That is one way. Another one is the microbial process. That means it may be the grazing by zooplankton, metabolism and respiration by heterotrophic microorganism may also release carbon dioxide, and also photooxidation of dissolved organic carbon products like carbon monoxide and dissolved inorganic carbon can be converted into carbon dioxide. So these are all the other sources of CO2 which may be responsible for the increase in CO2 in the seawater. And how the seawater can, carbon dioxide can be removed? Phytoplankton converts CO2 into organic carbon. So this is, so what overall when we say is CO2 is increasing by some process and CO2 is also removed by some other process. So what are the effect of changes of this ocean pH? So this is the second question we are going to answer. There are a couple of effects. One is a direct effect. So through interference in the calcification process. So this is one of the very important process by which the shells are being produced by for the many of the marine organisms. So this calcification process required by many organisms to build their hard body structures like planktons, mollusks and corals, etc. And another direct effect is through the physiological impact at various life stages, impacts on health through compromised immune system or change of behavior, competition and resource partitioning. These are all the physiological impact that happens because of the change of ocean pH. And what are the indirect effects? So through the alteration of food web. Oh, this is the most crucial one. The indirect effect is through the alteration of food web, which could result from the loss of carbonate species and interference with olfaction, respiration, metabolism and impairment of reproductive success. So these are all the problems, indirect problem that is happening in the food web. So some species, for example, seagrass may thrive at a higher CO2 concentration because they use it for the production of food, while others may have to adopt. And the long-term impact on marine chemistry and biology will be, it will threaten the food supply. That is what we had seen. The food webs are getting affected. Loss of coastal protection, diminished biodiversity and disrupted carbon cycling. These are all the other long-term effects of change of ocean pH. Now we can also see the effects on the marine life. So coral reef is affected, shellfish and fish and plankton, all these species are affected. For example, in the coral fish, what happens is the reduced calcification rates weaken the coral structures. So people also call this as a bleaching of coral reef. And in the case of shellfish, it is difficult in forming shells due to decreased availability of carbonate ion. So we will look at the chemistry behind this one. When the CO2 is getting dissolved in water, what actually happens and why there is a decreased availability of carbonate ion. So all those chemical reactions and mechanisms we will be looking at. And again, when we talk about the fish, it alters the behavior, impaired sensory abilities and reduced survival rate. And in the case of plankton, it affects the changes in the plankton's community, and it completely affects the entire food web. So these are all the impacts on the marine life. And we can also look at ecosystem and environmental impact, which are much bigger than this one. So one is the biodiversity loss, another one is altered ocean chemistry, and socioeconomic impacts are the major things which are happening. In the case of biodiversity loss, we can say decrease in the marine biodiversity due to habitat degradation and species decline that is happening. And what is the change in the ocean chemistry? So changes in the carbonate chemistry of seawater affects nutrient cycle. So these are all the various reactions we will be looking at soon. What are the socioeconomic impacts? So fisheries decline, tourism damage, economy decline. So these are all the other impacts of change of pH. And here is a schematic representation of the inorganic carbon system in the Arctic Ocean. So we have two major things. This is the ocean. So ocean has two types of hydrosphere, where the carbon dioxide is entering from the external sources. So that is one thing. There is terrestrial organic carbon entering through the rivers and other streams. That is one way of CO2 entering the hydrosphere. The other one is the internal one, where the marine organic carbon produces carbon dioxide. So these are all the two ways by which the hydrosphere receives the carbon dioxide. And there is also another exchange which happens from the atmosphere. So the carbon dioxide, gaseous carbon dioxide, can be dissolved into the ocean. So this is also another process that is happening. So all those things leads to carbon dioxide, which undergoes dissolution, and when it dissolves, it reacts with water to give carbonic acid, and the carbonic acid is in equilibrium with H plus ions and bicarbonate anions, which is in equilibrium with H plus ions and carbonate anions, and this carbonate anions reacts with calcium to form the calcium carbonate. So this is the overall carbon dioxide reactions that are happening. So there are two major reactions we have to understand. One is called the dissolution, and which is a simple physical process. Another one is hydrolysis, which is a chemical reaction. So even though we generally say dissolution of carbon dioxide in water, but it is actually a chemical reaction that is taking place. So we call that as a hydrolysis reaction, and it is not a simple dissolution per se. If you are looking at sodium chloride put into water, that simple process is called a physical change. That is a simple dissolution. So the sodium chloride gets dissociated into Na plus ions and Cl minus ions. That's it. But in the case of carbonic acid, CO2, when it dissolves in water, it doesn't exist as a H plus or OH minus ion separately, but it forms a H2CO3, which is the carbonic acid, and this carbonic acid actually undergoes further reactions to give H plus ions. So what literally happens is water is split into H plus and OH minus ions. That is the overall thing, but the second H plus ion also is lost. So in effect, what happens is carbon dioxide gets converted to carbonate anion, CO3 2 minus. So CO2 becomes CO3 2 minus. So that is what is the equation given here. So carbon dioxide, when is in the atmosphere, it is entering the hydrosphere, that is the ocean. So CO2 becomes aqueous and reacts with water to give carbonic acid. So this carbonic acid undergoes equilibrium reaction to produce H plus ions and bicarbonate anions. HCO3 minus anions are produced, and this also further undergoes second dissociation to give 2 H plus ions and CO3 2 minus ions. So literally what happens is H2O is now split into 2 H plus ions and O minus 2 ion. That O minus 2 ion is being captured by carbon dioxide to give the carbonate anion. So in effect, what actually happens is water is split. So it is a chemical process that is happening when CO2 reacts with water.